5:10 a.m., December 18th, 2025, Florida State Prison. A 58-year-old man wakes up knowing he has exactly 13 hours to live. His last breakfast, his last words, his last breath. But before we talk about how Frank Walls died, we need to talk about what he did at 1:30 in the morning on July 22, 1987, the night that sealed his fate. What he did was so twisted, so calculated, that it would haunt investigators for decades. He didn't break in quietly. He knocked over a fan on purpose. He wanted them to wake up terrified. The breakfast tray slides through the slot in his cell door. Scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice. He doesn't touch it. Why would he? At 11:30 this morning, he'll get his real final meal. Chicken, steak, vegetables, baked potato, cheesecake, and juice. He's had months to think about what he wanted to eat before he dies. The irony isn't lost on anyone. His victims never got to choose their last meals. A guard walks past, keys jangling against his belt. He doesn't look at Walls. There's a professional distance here, a cold understanding that this man strapped to a gurney tonight will become Florida's 19th execution of 2025. 19. That's the most executions the state has carried out in a single year since the death penalty came back in the 1970s. Historic numbers for a historic monster. But to understand why Frank Walls sits in this concrete cell counting down his final hours, we need to go back. Back to a cramped trailer in Okaloosa County. Back to warning signs that everyone saw but nobody reported. Back to 5 people who trusted that the world was safer than it actually was. Because the crime that put him here didn't happen overnight. It was building for years. Before we proceed, hit that subscribe button to show that you support us. You don't want to miss our next documentary. Let's continue. Frank Athen Walls was born on October 12, 1967, in Ocean City, Florida. Not much is known about his childhood, but what we do know paints a disturbing picture. By his teenage years, the signs were already there. Voyeurism, breaking into homes, hurting animals. Psychologists call this the homicidal triad, 3 behaviors in childhood that often predict violent criminals. Walls checked every box. By 1985, at just 17 years old, he was working as a dishwasher at a restaurant called Quincy's. Minimum wage, barely scraping by. He shared a cramped trailer with several roommates, and one of them, a man named Thomas Farnham, would later admit something chilling. He was terrified of Walls. Why? Because Walls talked constantly about rape, about murder, about specific, detailed methods to kill people without leaving evidence behind. Can you imagine living with someone like that? Hearing those conversations day after day and doing nothing? Farnham didn't call the police. He didn't report it. He just lived with that fear, hoping it would never become reality. But hope doesn't stop predators. Action does. And nobody took action. The question we have to ask is, could 5 murders have been prevented if just one person had spoken up? Think about that for a moment. March 26, 1985, Tuesday afternoon. The sun is blazing over Okaloosa Island, and 19-year-old Tommy Lou Whidden spreads her beach towel on the white sand. She's a college student studying education. She wants to be a teacher. She's got her whole life mapped out. Graduate, get certified, inspire kids the way her favorite teachers inspired her. Today, she's just enjoying spring break. Sunscreen on, book in hand, music playing softly from her car radio parked nearby. She has no idea she's being watched. Frank Walls is 50 yards away, picking up trash as part of court-ordered community service. Some petty crime landed him here, cleaning up beaches instead of sitting in jail. And that's when he spots her, alone, vulnerable, unsuspecting. He approaches slowly, trash bag in hand. To anyone watching, he's just a worker doing his job. Nobody suspects a thing, and that's exactly what he's counting on. When he's close enough, he drops the bag, pulls out a knife, and in one swift, emotionless motion, he slashes Tommy Lou's throat. There's no warning, No confrontation, no chance to scream. Just a college student bleeding out on the sand while her killer casually walks to her car, takes her keys, and drives away like he's just finishing a shift at work. Her body is found hours later by a jogger. The beach transforms into a crime scene. Police tape, forensics teams, horrified beachgoers trying to process what happened in broad daylight. Her car is discovered the next day, abandoned behind some random building like worthless trash. No witnesses, no leads. The case goes cold.
And Frank Walls, he goes back to his trailer, back to his dishwashing job, back to his life. For 18 months, he waits. But the urge to kill is growing stronger. Here's what's terrifying about serial killers. They don't usually stop after one. Once they've crossed that line, once they've felt that power over another human life, they need it again. The question isn't if they'll kill again, it's when. September 16th, 1986. Wright, Florida. If Tommy Lou's murder was surgical precision, what Frank Walls does to 24-year-old Cynthia Sue Condra is pure, uncontrolled rage. Cynthia is engaged. She's planning her wedding for the following spring. She works retail, and everyone loves her. She's outgoing, friendly, the kind of person who trusts people. Maybe that's why she doesn't see the danger until it's too late. She's leaving her late shift, walking to her car near her apartment complex when Walls ambushes her. And this time, he doesn't just kill her, he destroys her. 21 stab wounds. Forensic analysts would later note that the pattern suggests rage, not just intent to kill. Defensive wounds on her hands and arms show she fought back. She fought hard, but she was overpowered. He leaves her body on the roadside, doesn't even try to hide it. The arrogance is stunning. He believes he's untouchable. By the time morning commuters discover her, terror spreads through the community like wildfire. But here's the problem. This is a different county than Tommy Lou's murder. Different methodology, too. Investigators don't connect the cases. They're looking for different killers. The cases go cold separately. Cynthia's fiancé attends vigils. He'll never get married. He'll never get the life they planned together. And Frank Walls walks free. 2 murders, 2 unsolved cases, 2 families destroyed. Notice the pattern? Each killing is worse than the last. 1 throat slash becomes 21 stab wounds. He's escalating. And 8 months later, he'll make a mistake that will eventually unravel everything. But not before 3 more people die. May 20th, 1987, 2:47 a.m. near Fort Walton Beach. Audrey Gigi's mobile home sits dark and quiet. She's 47 years old, works at the Caltech factory, and has just fallen asleep after a late shift. She's proud of her life. She's single, independent, and just paid off her mobile home. It's hers. She's safe. Or so she thinks. Frank Walls forces the window lock and enters silently. By the time Audrey wakes, he's already in her bedroom. What happens next is a sexual assault. We don't need graphic details to understand the trauma. When he's done, he flees, gets in his car, drives away. Audrey is alive, traumatized, terrified, but alive. And that's when something extraordinary happens in Walls' twisted mind. He's 2 miles away when the realization hits him. He left a witness, someone who can identify him. In his cold, rational calculation, he decides he can't allow that. Most killers flee and never look back, but Walls isn't like most killers. He thinks strategically. So he turns the car around, drives back, returns to her mobile home. He finds Audrey trying to call the police, and this time he doesn't hesitate. He stabs her to death, makes sure she's dead. Then, almost as an afterthought, he steals a cheap plastic fan and a small radio, worth maybe $15 combined. Worthless junk. But in his rush to leave, he makes a critical error. He leaves his fingerprint on that fan. Audrey's coworker finds her body the next morning when she doesn't show up for her shift. The scene is horrific, but the evidence, it's there. A fingerprint on that fan. Only problem is, it's 1987. DNA technology isn't advanced enough yet to process it quickly. So that fingerprint sits in an evidence locker, waiting.
For 7 years, it waits. Think about that. The evidence that will eventually put Walls on death row is sitting in a box while he walks around free. How many times did he pass that evidence locker? How many times did investigators walk right past the answer? But in July 1987, just 2 months after Audrey's murder, Walls commits the crime that will finally end his freedom. And this one is personal. This one will haunt everyone who hears about it.
July 22nd, 1987, 1:30 a.m., Greenwood Mobile Home Park. Edward Alger and Ann Peterson are asleep. Edward is 22, an airman stationed at Eglin Air Force Base. He's dedicated, recently promoted, proud to serve his country. Ann is 20, works at the local library and dreams of teaching literature someday. They've been together for 6 months, and Edward has a secret. There's a ring hidden in his sock drawer. He's planning to propose next month. They're in love. They're planning their future. They're safe in their small mobile home. Or they think they are. Frank Walls doesn't break in quietly. Here's what makes this so psychologically twisted. He deliberately knocks over a fan to make noise. He wants them to wake up. He wants to watch them realize someone's in their home. He wants to see the terror in their eyes. Edward and Ann stumble out of bed, confused and half asleep. They find Walls standing in their living room with a .22 caliber handgun and a knife. Edward tries to reason with him, tries to negotiate, offers him money, anything he wants, but Walls stays silent, just gesturing with the gun. Then comes the moment that defines how truly evil this man is. Walls forces Ann to tie up Edward's hands and ankles. Think about that. Imagine being forced to restrain the person you love, knowing what's coming next, knowing you're helping your own killer. Ann's hands are shaking. She's crying. She keeps apologizing to Edward, and Edward keeps telling her it's okay, it's not your fault, even though both of them know nothing is okay. Once Edward is bound, Walls ties Ann's hands and gags them both with duct tape. Then he drags Ann to the living room and leaves Edward alone in the bedroom, helpless in the darkness. Edward can hear Ann crying in the other room. He's pulling desperately at his restraints. His wrists are bleeding from the rope, but the blood makes it slippery. And that's when Edward Alger makes a decision that will define his final moments. He's not going to die without a fight. Working frantically, Edward manages to loosen the ropes enough to slip his hands free. He tears off the gag, frees his ankles, and finds a kitchen knife in a drawer. For a moment, just a brief, shining moment, there's hope. He has a weapon. He has surprise on his side. Maybe, just maybe, he can save them both. Edward creeps toward the living room and bursts in, attacking Walls from behind. There's a violent struggle. Walls is shocked. He didn't expect resistance. They fight viciously, and Edward is fighting not just for his life, but for Ann's too. But Walls overpowers him and slashes his throat with the knife. Edward is dying, but he's not done. In his final act of defiance, he bites down on Walls' hand with every ounce of strength he has left, draws blood, forces Walls to drop the knife. For one incredible moment, Edward almost wins. But he's bleeding out. His strength is fading, and Walls recovers, steps back, and pulls his gun. 3 shots to Edward's head at point-blank range. Edward Alger dies, the only victim who fought back, the only one who almost won. Would you have had that kind of courage? Could anyone? Walls returns to the living room. Ann has witnessed Edward's death through the doorway. He removes her gag, and she begs for her life. "Please, I won't tell anyone," she says. But Walls doesn't care about words. He sexually assaults her, then raises his gun and shoots her in the head. The shot isn't fatal. Ann is still alive, still suffering, still conscious. And here's where Walls reveals the true depths of his psychopathy. He takes a pillow from the couch and places it over her face, not out of mercy, not to end her suffering, but because he doesn't want to watch her die. It's for his comfort, not hers. Then he shoots her again through the pillow. This time, Ann Peterson dies.
He stands in the silent mobile home, surrounded by two bodies and blood everywhere. Calmly, methodically, he searches the place, finds $200, a worn leather wallet, another fan. He wipes down surfaces, though he does it poorly. Then he walks out at 2:47 a.m. like nothing happened. For 23 hours, Frank Walls thinks he's gotten away with the perfect crime. He drives home in the early morning darkness, parks his car, and walks into the trailer like he's coming back from a late-night shift. He tosses the stolen wallet on his dresser, throws the blood-stained jeans in the corner, lies down in his bed, and sleeps soundly. The next morning, he wakes up and makes breakfast. Scrambled eggs, toast, coffee, like it's just another Tuesday. His roommate, John Early, walks into the kitchen and notices Walls sitting there, eating calmly, acting completely normal. But something feels wrong.
Early waits until Walls leaves for work. Then he searches the trailer. What he finds makes his blood run cold. Blood-stained jeans crumpled in the corner. Not just a little blood, soaked through. A .22 caliber handgun tucked under the mattress, duct tape, rope, and in the trash, bloodied paper towels that Walls tried to dispose of. John Early stands there, staring at the evidence, and faces a decision. He could ignore it, pretend he never saw it. Walls is dangerous. What if he finds out Early snooped? What if he comes after him next? But Early thinks about the roommate who came before him, Thomas Farnham, who lived with this same fear and said nothing. He thinks about the conversations Walls had, the warnings everyone ignored, and he realizes doing nothing isn't an option anymore. At 11:42 a.m. on July 23, 1987, John Early makes an anonymous call to the Okaloosa County Sheriff's Office. "You need to check the trailer at 1247 Gulf Avenue," he says. "The guy who lives here, Frank Walls, I think he killed those people at Greenwood Mobile Home Park." The dispatcher asks how he knows. Early doesn't give his name. He just says, "Check his bedroom. The evidence is there." Officers arrive within 30 minutes. They knock on the door. Walls answers, still in his work uniform from Quincy's, calm as can be. "Can I help you?" he asks. "We have a warrant to search this residence," the lead detective says. Walls doesn't resist, doesn't run. He just steps aside and lets them in, like he's got nothing to hide. That confidence almost works in his favor for about 5 minutes. Then they find the bedroom. Blood-stained jeans. Analysis will later confirm it's Edward Alger's blood mixed with Ann Peterson's. The .22 caliber handgun hidden under the mattress. Ballistics will match it to the bullets that killed them both. Duct tape that matches the tape used to gag the victims. Rope with fibers matching the restraints. And the stolen wallet with Edward's ID still inside. But that's not all. Detectives keep searching and find what can only be described as an arsenal of depravity. Multiple knives, including the one used to slash Edward's throat. Ice picks, more guns, violent pornography stacked in boxes. Thumbtacks. Investigators still aren't sure what those were for. And maybe that's for the best. "Frank Walls, you're under arrest for the murders of Edward Alger and Ann Peterson," the detective says, pulling out handcuffs. Walls says nothing. Doesn't ask for a lawyer, doesn't proclaim his innocence. He just holds out his wrists and lets them cuff him. As they walk him to the patrol car, neighbors come out to watch. Some of them would later tell reporters they always knew something was off about that guy, but none of them ever reported it. Think about that. An entire community with a bad feeling and not one phone call until John Early found the courage to act. The trial begins in July 1988. It lasts 6 days, but those 6 days feel like an eternity for the family sitting in the courtroom gallery. Edward's parents, Ann's mother who clutches a photograph of her daughter and sobs quietly through the testimony. Friends, loved ones, people who will never be the same. The prosecution's case is overwhelming. Forensic experts testify about the blood evidence. The .22 caliber handgun is matched definitively to the bullets pulled from both victims. The stolen wallet is presented. John Early testifies about what he found in the trailer, though he avoids looking at Walls during the entire testimony. But the most devastating testimony comes from the medical examiner. He describes Edward's injuries in clinical detail. The slash across his throat, the 3 bullet wounds to his head at close range, the bite mark on Walls' hand that matches Edward's dental records, proof that Edward fought back until his final breath.
Then he describes Anne's injuries. The first non-fatal gunshot to her head. The second shot through the pillow. The evidence of sexual assault. Anne's mother leaves the courtroom during this testimony. She can't bear to hear it. Walls sits at the defense table, expressionless. His lawyer tries to argue reasonable doubt, but there isn't any. The evidence is too strong. The jury deliberates for less than 4 hours. Guilty. 2 counts of first-degree murder. The sentencing phase comes 2 weeks later, on August 25, 1988. The prosecution argues for the death penalty. Wall's lawyer argues for mercy, citing his youth. He was only 19 when he killed Edward and Anne, his difficult childhood, his potential for rehabilitation. Anne's mother gives a victim impact statement. She talks about the future Anne will never have, the students she'll never teach, the grandchildren she'll never give her. "He didn't just kill my daughter," she says, her voice breaking. "He killed everyone she would have become." Edward's father speaks too. He's a military veteran, and he stands ramrod straight as he addresses the court. "My son died defending the woman he loved," he says. "He fought with every ounce of courage in his body. He deserved better than this. He deserved justice." The judge sentences Walls to death for Anne's murder and life in prison for Edward's. As they lead him out of the courtroom, Walls finally shows emotion, a small smile, like he knows something everyone else doesn't. What he knows is this: death penalty cases take years, decades. He's got time. And he's right. In 1989, the Florida Supreme Court overturns his conviction on procedural grounds, something about jury instructions not being properly given. It's a technicality, not a declaration of innocence, but it doesn't matter. The conviction is thrown out. The families are devastated. They have to go through it all again. Another trial, another set of victim impact statements, another round of hearing exactly how their loved ones died. The second trial happens in 1992. Same evidence, same testimony, same outcome. Guilty on both counts. Death sentence. This time, the conviction holds. And while he's sitting in that cell, investigators are still working. In 1994, advances in DNA and fingerprint technology allow them to process evidence from old cases. Remember that $15 fan from Audrey Geigy's murder? They dust it for prints. The fingerprint matches Walls. Suddenly, the dots connect. Detectives link him to 3 more murders. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the certainty of another death sentence, Walls makes a deal. He enters a no-contest plea for Audrey's murder. He accepts responsibility for Tommy Lou Whidden in 1985. He accepts responsibility for Cynthia Sue Condra in 1986. 5 confirmed murders, 5 families destroyed. And Frank Walls sits on death row for 38 years, filing appeal after appeal after appeal. He claims intellectual disability, says his IQ is 72, which would make him ineligible for execution. But prison records show he previously scored around 100 on IQ tests. The judge sees through it immediately. He's not disabled. He's desperate. He's faking mental impairment to avoid the needle. Every appeal gets denied. Florida Supreme Court, federal appeals courts, finally the U.S. Supreme Court. All of them say the same thing. The execution will proceed. In November 2025, Governor Ron DeSantis signs the death warrant. The date is set, December 18th, 2025. And that brings us back to where we started. 5:10 a.m., cell block D, 13 hours to live. At 9 a.m., a spiritual advisor arrives. Walls accepts guidance and prays. Is it genuine? Nobody knows. At 11:30 a.m., his final meal arrives. Chicken, steak, vegetables, baked potato, cheesecake, juice. He eats most of it. His appetite is fine. No remorse affecting his ability to enjoy his last steak.
Throughout the afternoon, his legal team makes final desperate calls.
At 4:47 p.m., the U.S. Supreme Court issues its final decision. The stay is denied. The execution will proceed. At 5:30 p.m., guards come to his cell. It's time. They escort him to the execution chamber. Witnesses gather. Families of his victims are there, sitting behind glass. Media witnesses, too, because this is Florida's 19th execution of 2025. Historic numbers require documentation. Walls is strapped to the gurney. IV lines are inserted into his arms. A microphone is positioned near his head for his final words. The warden asks if he has anything to say. Walls speaks briefly. "I'm sorry for the pain my actions caused." That's it. Generic, emotionless. No mention of his victims by name, no specifics, just a vague apology that costs him nothing. Behind the glass, some family members are crying. Others sit stone-faced. The warden asks if he has anything else to say. "No," Walls says. "I'm ready." At 6 p.m., the first drug is administered. It's a sedative meant to make him unconscious within seconds, quick and painless in theory. But something goes wrong. Walls moves. His eyes are still open. He appears distressed. At 6:03 p.m., the second drug, a paralytic, is administered. At 6:05 p.m., the third drug that stops the heart. But he's still showing signs of consciousness, body movements, visible distress. Witnesses shift uncomfortably in their seats. This isn't how it's supposed to go. Executions are supposed to be clinical, peaceful, over in minutes. The minutes stretch. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. For 15 full minutes, Frank Walls struggles against the chemicals coursing through his veins. Witnesses later describe visible distress, movements that suggest he's experiencing what he put his victims through, prolonged suffering. At 6:11 p.m., a doctor checks his vitals and makes the official pronouncement. Time of death, 6:11 p.m. The witnesses are escorted out. Some victims' families have tears streaming down their faces. Others look relieved. Some look disturbed by what they just witnessed. Florida's 19th execution of 2025 is complete, the most executions in a single year since the death penalty was reinstated. Walls' 38 years on death row makes his one of the longest-running death penalty cases in state history. But before we close this story, we need to remember the people who truly matter. Not the monster who died tonight, but the 5 people who never got a chance to live. Tommy Lou Whiddon never graduated college. She was 19. Cynthia Sue Condra never got married. She was 24. Audrey Geige never got to retire. She was 47. Edward Alger never got to propose to the woman he loved. He was 22. Ann Peterson never became a teacher. She was 20. They didn't get 38 years to file appeals. They didn't get final meals or spiritual advisors or peaceful deaths surrounded by procedure and protocol. They got Frank Athen Walls. They got terror and pain and lives cut brutally short. 5 victims, 38 years, 1 execution. On December 18, 2025, at 6:11 p.m., justice, delayed but determined, caught up with Frank Athen Walls. But here's the question we're left with, the question that should haunt us. For the families who waited 38 years to see this sentence carried out, for the victims who never got a chance to grow old, was justice truly served? Does waiting nearly 4 decades diminish justice, or does it prove the system works eventually? When someone like Edward Alger fights back with such extraordinary courage, only to die anyway, what does that say about the randomness of violence? And here's the hardest question. If Thomas Farnham had reported those disturbing conversations in 1985, if someone had taken action when the warning signs were there, could 5 murders have been prevented? We'll never know, but maybe that's the real lesson here. Evil doesn't announce itself with a warning label. It lives next door. It works the dishwashing job. It talks about horrific things, and we tell ourselves it's just talk. Until it isn't. What do you think? After hearing this story, do you believe 38 years on death row followed by execution is justice? Or is there no such thing as true justice when lives are taken that can never be returned? Leave your thoughts in the comments.